Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Try to breathe. Level 7.
You use this yoga stick for 10 minutes every day for a week. You'll notice people around you starting to envy you. If you can use this yoga stick continuously for 15 minutes, you'll understand.
Jewish philosopher discovered something about Jesus' father that made the church want him dead. They burned his books, banned his name, and 300 years later, most people still don't know what he found. Amsterdam, 1656. A young man with dark curly hair and intense eyes sits alone in a candlelit room, writing by hand on parchment paper. His name is Baruch Spinoza, and he's about to ask a question that will get him kicked out of everything he's ever known. He's staring at Hebrew texts spread across a wooden table, ancient scrolls that tell the story of Moses, of miracles, of divine intervention. But something doesn't add up. The more he reads, the more he sees patterns that don't match what the rabbis are teaching in the synagogue. And then he asks it. The question that changes everything. If God wrote the Torah, why does it describe Moses' death? Moses couldn't have written about his own funeral. Someone else added that later. And if someone added that, what else was added? What else was changed? This single thought cracks open a door that leads Spinoza down a path nobody in his community wants him to go. Within months, the Jewish elders will gather in that same synagogue where his family has worshipped for generations, and they will do something they reserve for only the worst offenders. They will excommunicate him with a curse so severe that even his own mother wouldn't be allowed to speak to him. But that's just the beginning, because what Spinoza discovers goes way beyond questioning who wrote the Torah. He's about to reveal something about God, about about Jesus' father Joseph, about the entire foundation of how we understand religion that will make both the Catholic Church and Protestant leaders want to erase it from history. So what did he actually discover? Let's start with the Bible itself, because Spinoza did something that was basically illegal at the time. He read it like a detective investigating a crime scene. He looked at inconsistencies, at writing styles, at historical contradictions, and he came to a conclusion that would get anyone killed in the 1600s. The Bible wasn't written by God. It was written by humans, edited by humans, changed by humans over hundreds of years. Different authors, different time periods, different political agendas. He could prove it by pointing to passages where the same story is told twice with completely different details, where the writing style suddenly changes mid-chapter, where events are described that happened centuries after the supposed author died. But here's where it gets really dangerous. Spinoza then turns his attention to the New Testament, to the story of Jesus, and specifically to Joseph, the man called the father of Jesus. According to Christian doctrine, Joseph wasn't really Jesus' father, right? God was. The virgin birth, the immaculate conception, the whole thing. But Spinoza looks at this story and sees something else entirely. He sees a narrative that was constructed, built up over time, shaped by people who needed Jesus to be more than human to make their religion work. He suggests that Joseph was simply Jesus' biological father, that the virgin birth story was added later, decades after Jesus died, trying to make Jesus fit the prophecies of the Old Testament. They needed a miraculous birth, so they wrote one. They needed divine parentage, so they created it. This wasn't about disrespecting Jesus or his teachings. Spinoza actually thought Jesus was an incredibly wise teacher, but he saw the difference between the man Jesus and the mythology built around him. Now you might be thinking, okay, so he questioned some Bible stories. Why was that such a huge deal? Because in the 1600s, saying the Bible was written by humans wasn't just controversial, it was heresy, punishable by death. The entire power structure of Europe was built on the idea that the Bible was the literal word of God, that kings ruled by divine right, that the church had authority because it was God's representative on earth. If the Bible was just a book written by people, then all of that collapses. The church couldn't allow that. Jewish authorities couldn't allow that. Nobody in power could allow that. But Spinoza wasn't done. He went further. He developed a complete philosophy that redefined what God even is. This is where things get really wild, because what Spinoza proposes is so different from traditional religion that it's almost hard to wrap your head around at first. He said, God isn't a bearded man in the sky watching you and judging your actions. God isn't a person at all. God is everything. God is nature. God is the universe. God is the laws of physics. God is existence itself. He called it Deus sive natura, God or nature. Same thing. When you look at a tree, you're looking at God. When you feel the wind, that's God. When you follow the laws of mathematics.
Tapos na. Mag-hint na, mag-hint. Pig. Pig. Di man. Pia. Jawoy. Ate ni. Congrats. 7
There's
over
a
8
plant
man.
whose
Bulok mo na.
extract is injected into the veins of dying patients in European emergency rooms. It is a licensed hospital antidote for one of the deadliest poisonings on Earth, death cap mushroom toxin. A single death cap can carry enough amatoxin to kill a grown adult. Symptoms hide for 24 hours. Then comes the fake recovery. Then the liver dies. In nearly 1,500 documented cases, the intravenous extract of this plant cut mortality below 10%.
Rare.
But in Washington state, it is a class, a noxious weed. Eradication.
Yawa.
Have you ever heard of a plant that can survive with just water and is even easier to care for than a cactus? Not only are its flowers incredibly beautiful, but just one pot is enough to fill an entire room with its fragrance. Professor Brian at Cornell University has spent 7 years developing a lotus variety suitable for global climates. It needs no soil, just a bowl of water is enough to keep it alive. After activation, the seeds germinate in 3 days and in just 15 days. The flowering period lasts over 200 days. And once planted, it will bloom again every year.
Over
It
8.
can withstand
Wow,
the
clean.
harsh cold of Alaska,
Level
adding
13
color
na
to your
check.
home, even in the chilly winter.
Just go. This is challenge.
Of lemon, jasmine, and lavender easily fills a room and perfectly replaces chemical air fresheners. The aromatic compounds it releases can absorb harmful substances like formaldehyde from the air, earning it the title of a natural air purifier. It's easy to care for and can thrive in any season. This plant whose extract is injected in the veins of dying patients in European emergency rooms. It is a licensed hospital antidote for one of the deadliest poisonings on Earth, death cap mushroom toxin. A single death cap can carry enough amatoxin to kill a grown adult. Symptoms hide for 24 hours. Then comes the fake recovery, then the liver dies. In nearly 1,500 documented cases, the intravenous extract of this plant cut mortality below 10%. But in Washington state, it is a class, a noxious weed. Eradication is required by law. Transport restricted. Sale restricted. The same plant that blocks a lethal toxin from entering human liver cells is classified for destruction in the same Pacific Northwest landscapes, where death cap mushrooms are spreading. An antidote cannot patent.
Yes.
A medicine that grows without permission. A compound that changes the lock on a dying cell's door. And a weed you are required by law to destroy. This is milk thistle, the emergency room antidote they are required to eradicate. Welcome to Buried Garden. The archive opens in 1968 in a West German laboratory with a molecule no one had named. The archive opens in 1968 at the University of Munich in West Germany. Professor Hildebert Wagner had been chasing a molecule for years. Not a new molecule, an old one. One that European herbalists had been using for centuries without knowing its name, its structure, or why it worked. They only knew that it worked on the liver, that when the organ failed, when jaundice set in, when the body turned yellow with its own poison, this plant offered something. Wagner wanted to know what. His team had already laid the groundwork. 3 years earlier, in 1965, Wagner, alongside Horhammer and Munster, had reported the structures of previously unknown flavonoids extracted from the fruits of Silybum mariana, a finding documented by the American Chemical Society. But identifying structures was not the same as isolating the active complex. The puzzle was not what was in the seed. The puzzle was what worked together. What they expected was a single compound, a clean, isolatable drug candidate, one molecule, one mechanism, one patent. What they found was a constellation, not one active substance, but several. A mixture of flavonolignans bound together in the hard, dark, unremarkable-looking seeds that come from those spiny purple flower heads. Wagner gave the constellation a name. He called it Silly Mary. The same year, working independently, Pelter and Hansel isolated one of its brightest components, silibin, confirming the mixture was real, reproducible, and measurable across laboratories. Picture what Wagner was handling. Seeds are small and hard. They come from a plant that does not invite touch. Milk thistle stands 2 to 6 feet tall on stout branching stems. Its broad leaves clasping the stalk with spiny margins sharp enough to draw blood through a cotton glove. The leaves carry a signature no other common thistle shares. A high contrast marbling of white veins against glossy green. So distinctive that state weed agencies across the Pacific Northwest use that pattern as the primary field identification marker. The purple flower heads bristle with spine-tipped bracts. This is not a plant that cooperates. You do not casually harvest milk thistle. You earn every seed. And inside those seeds, a pharmacy. They did not find a drug, they found a pharmacy inside a single seed. But here's the distinction that would define every controversy to follow. Silymarin is not a single molecule. It is a complex mixture. Different extracts yield different ratios of its components. Different products on different shelves contain different versions of what Wagner named. This is precisely why clinical evidence across supplement brands would later become messy. The mixture that Wagner isolated was real. The standardization problem it created was permanent. This was the moment milk thistle crossed from centuries of folk knowledge to molecular reality. A named compound, a measurable mechanism, the kind of specificity that would eventually put this plant's extract into intravenous bags in European emergency rooms, and the kind of specificity that would expose a widening gap between what Europe was willing to license and what the United States still treats as investigational. Before Wagner, milk thistle was folklore. After Wagner, it was a target, and the first target was death itself. Long before a German phytochemist gave it a molecular name, the plant had a reputation. Across its native range, spanning Macaronesia, the Mediterranean basin, into Central and Southwest Asia, and as far as Ethiopia, according to Kew's accepted distribution, milk thistle had been used as a liver remedy in European herbal traditions for centuries. The specifics of ancient preparations are difficult to pin to single sources with documentary precision, but the pattern is unmistakable. Where the plant grew, healers used it, and what they used it for, overwhelmingly, was the liver. The plant itself carries a paradox in its body. Every margin is armed. Spines line the leaves, ring the flower heads, guard the bracts. Handling milk thistle without heavy gloves is an exercise in bleeding. Grazing animals learn this quickly. Most avoid it entirely, which is part of why it persists in pastures where everything else is eaten down to dirt. It is, in the most literal sense, a plant that defends itself. But peel a young stalk, strip away the fibrous, spiny outer skin. The interior is pale, crisp, and startlingly sweet. Culinary foraging traditions describe the taste as sweet celery. Fingers pull back the armor. Beneath is tender. This is not a detail that matters chemically, but it matters cinematically. A plant that hurts to touch and rewards you going deeper. A medicine wrapped in thorns. What Wagner's 1968 isolation did was translate centuries of that intuition into a language that pharmaceutical systems could process, and the translation accelerated fast. From silymarin, the mixture, researchers narrowed their focus to silibinin, its most pharmacologically active constituent. From oral extracts sold in apothecary bottles, the formulation evolved into something radically different, an intravenous preparation called Legalon Sil, a water-soluble derivative designed not for supplement shelves, but for hospital crash carts. The pivot was not gradual. Someone, reading the mechanism data and understanding what silibinin did at the cellular level, realized this compound might not merely support a struggling liver, it might block a toxin from entering liver cells at all. That realization changed the story from chronic care to emergency medicine, from supplement to antidote, from the slow question of whether milk thistle helps damaged livers heal, to the urgent question of whether it can stop a liver from being destroyed in real time. The answer required a killer, and nature had already provided one. You eat a mushroom, it tastes fine, maybe slightly earthy, maybe slightly nutty, and nothing warns you. You cook it into a risotto or saute it with garlic. You go to bed feeling normal. 6 hours pass, 12, sometimes 24. Nothing happens. No nausea, no cramping, no warning of any kind. But inside your liver, the toxin is already at work. Amatoxin, produced by Amanita phalloides, the death cap mushroom, has entered your hepatocytes and begun destroying them from within. Then the first phase hits, violent gastroenteritis, vomiting, diarrhea, cramps that double you over. You go to the emergency room, they treat the symptoms, and then something cruel happens. You feel better. The symptoms ease. Your body seems to recover. Doctors may note improvement. Family members exhale. This is the second phase, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention describe it in clinical language that barely conceals its horror, a misleading symptomatic improvement window. The recovery is fake. It is not healing. It is a pause between waves of destruction. Day 3 arrives, sometimes day 4, sometimes 5. And now the liver announces what has been happening in silence. Fulminant hepatic failure, multi-organ collapse. By the time the real damage shows itself, the organ is already dying. Symptoms wait 6 to 24 hours. Then the recovery is fake. Organ failure hits day 3. The CDC documents the arithmetic of this killing. The lethal dose of amatoxin can be as low as 0.1 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. A single Amanita phalloides mushroom can contain up to 15 milligrams of the toxin. One mushroom, one meal, one mistake. In 2006, a team led by Letcher published a finding in Toxicological Sciences that reframed the entire conversation. They identified the specific transporter protein, OATP1B3, that carries amatoxin into human liver cells. This was not a vague immune response or a general inflammation pathway. This was a door, a named, measurable, molecular door through which the toxin enters and begins its destruction. And psilibinin, the compound Wagner's team had isolated from milk thistle seeds nearly 4 decades earlier, could change the lock. Your liver cells have a door, a transporter called OATP1B3. Amatoxin walks through that door, enters the cell, and destroys it from inside. Psilibinin changes the lock. The toxin reaches the door and cannot get in. Letchard's team demonstrated that psilibinin dehemisuccinate inhibits the OATP1B3 transporter, reducing hepatocyte uptake of amatoxin. Clinical toxicology review confirmed the broader picture. Psilibinin also interrupts enterohepatic recirculation, the cycle that recirculates the toxin through the liver again and again, compounding the damage with every pass. A weed, a plant listed for mandatory eradication in Washington state, and its extract can change the lock on a human liver cell, block one of the most lethal natural toxins on Earth. In Europe, the intravenous formulation, Legalon SIL, is licensed in most countries as an antidote for amatoxin poisoning. In a clinical review published in 2012 by Mengs, Pohl, and Mitchell, the outcomes were stark. Among nearly 1,500 documented cases of patients treated with Legalon SIL, overall mortality was under 10%. Among patients treated with penicillin or penicillin combinations, mortality exceeded 20%. The evidence is not from randomized controlled trials, and it cannot be, for the reason that makes this medicine among antidotes. You cannot give a placebo to someone dying of mushroom poisoning. But here is where honesty demands a second beat. The intravenous antidote story is not the supplement aisle story. Randomized controlled trial, the CINCH study published in JAMA in 2012, tested higher than the result was blunt. Silymarin did not significantly reduce liver enzyme levels more than placebo. A Cochrane review of milk thistle for alcoholic and hepatitis liver diseases reached a similar conclusion, finding no demonstrable significant effects on mortality or complications in high-quality trials. The chronic liver detox claim that fills supplement aisles is not supported by the same evidence that supports the acute antidote. 2 different stories, one plant, and only one of them is licensed anywhere.
Well, a little birdie told me rates are taking a dip, which means that dream home won't be there forever. Don't let someone else beat you to it. Start your search today. Get real with Realtor.com.
25% off, and it's on your doorstep in 3 to 4 days. It's a spiral-bound, full-colour book with 140 plus practical remedies you'll actually use. And right now, it's not 10% or 20% off. It's a massive 75% off, plus 2 free bonus guides. We ship fast, 3 to 5 days in the US and Australia, 7 to 10 worldwide, tracked and insured. Grab your your copy today at 75% off.
Found the perfect comfy cargo pants for senior men. Flex Rover. Everything you need is covered. In the United States, intravenous Silibidin is not routinely available. It is not on hospital formularies. Accessing it requires emergency FDA approval or enrollment in a clinical trial. The clinicaltrials.gov record titled Intravenous Milk documents a loading dose of 5 milligrams per kilogram and a continuous infusion of 20 milligrams per gram per day. It remains investigational, and it is still not standard of care. Europe licenses it. The United States makes you file paperwork while the patient's liver fails. And in the Pacific Northwest, the region where Amanita phalloides is an increasing public health concern, where foragers and immigrants and families stumble onto death caps in parks and backyards, the plant that produces the antidote is classified for eradication. The suppression story is not abstract, it is geographic. In 1989, the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board added milk thistle to its Class A noxious weed list. Under Washington statute, Class A designates weeds that are not native to the state, of limited distribution or unrecorded, and that pose a serious threat. The classification triggered immediate consequences. Milk thistle was placed on the Washington State quarantine list. Transport, sale was restricted. Distribution of plants, plant parts, and certain seed mixes was restricted. King County published the enforcement language plainly. Eradication is required statewide, not management, not monitoring. Eradication. Destroy it site. And the classification is not arbitrary. This must be said clearly. The power of this story is not in conspiracy. It is in collision. Milk thistle is a prolific cedar. It forms dense stands that crowd out native vegetation and displace beneficial forage grasses. A single plant can occupy the space of a small shrub, where it establishes livestock lose grazing ground. But the displacement is not the lethal problem. Milk thistle is a documented nitrate accumulator. When cattle ingest the plant, particularly under conditions that elevate nitrate levels in the tissue, the consequences are physiological and rapid. Nitrate converts to nitrite in the rumen. Nitrite binds to hemoglobin and converts it to methemoglobin. Methemoglobin cannot carry oxygen. The blood turns chocolate brown. Mucous membranes go blue. The animal weakens, staggers, and collapses. A veterinary review published in 2025 traces cattle intoxication linked to milk thistle in the literature back to 1955. This is not a recent myth. This is a 70-year-old range management hazard confirmed by the University of California's Livestock Extension Circulars, by Oregon's Department of Agriculture, and by Washington's own Noxious Weed Board. Oregon tells the same story from a different angle. The Oregon Department of Agriculture assigns milk thistle an ODA rating of B and documents the first Oregon record as 1886, Multnomah County. By now, modern infestations are, in the agency's language, often associated with livestock operations. The plant thrives on the nitrogen-rich, disturbed ground that cattle create. It feeds on what farming leaves behind. And then there is the irony that Portland's invasive plant guidance makes explicit that milk thistle is grown for the herbal supplement market and has escaped cultivation. The supplement industry's demand helped spread the plant into the very landscapes it is now classified for eradication. The market that sells it in capsules created the infestation that regulators are ordered to destroy. The plant cannot be patented. The intravenous extract cannot be routinely purchased. The weed cannot be legally transported across state quarantine lines. And the most promising antidote for the Pacific Northwest's most dangerous mushroom grows in the same pastures where it is illegal to let it stand. They listed it for eradication in 1989. The Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board gave it a Class A designation, the highest threat category the state assigns. They placed it on the quarantine list, restricting transport, sale, and distribution of any plant part under Washington state law. They documented it as a prolific cedar that forms dense stands and destroys livestock forage. They were right. It does. They confirmed it accumulates nitrates lethal to grazing cattle, a finding in literature stretching back 7 decades, reinforced by the Oregon Department of Agriculture and listed in the University of California Extension circulars. And they still require emergency permission from the FDA to inject its extract into a dying patient's veins. One doctor saw the collision clearly. His name was Todd Mitchell. He would later describe his place in medicine with a line that belongs in this story. He attributed his willingness to act partly to having one foot out of the mainstream. He said it was the one time where his essential nature served him well. That essential nature would be tested on a January night in 2007. January 2nd, 2007. Dominican Hospital, Watsonville, California.
Perfect.
Dr. Todd Mitchell received a phone call. 6 members of a single family had been admitted. All of them ill. All of them dying.